People often assume that age takes things away: strength, purpose, relevance. They believe that when hair turns gray and steps become slower, a person becomes smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. What they fail to understand is that age does not erase power, it refines it. Her name was Evelyn Harper, and at 78 years old, she had learned something most people never do. Silence is not the absence of strength, it is the storage of it. Evelyn lived in a modest single-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the American Midwest, the kind of place where lawns were trimmed with precision, mailboxes matched, and neighbors smiled politely without ever truly knowing one another. Her house stood at the end of the street, slightly older than the rest. The paint had faded, the wooden porch creaked softly when stepped on, and the flower beds were simple, not decorative. To most people, Evelyn was invisible. She liked it that way. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away nearly 10 years earlier. They had shared a life built on routine, respect, and quiet companionship. When he died, the house became quieter but not emptier. Memories filled the space where conversation once lived. Their children had moved away long ago. Careers, families, obligations. Calls became monthly, then occasional, then rare. Evelyn did not blame them. Loneliness, she believed, was not caused by absence. It was caused by expectation. So she adjusted hers. Every morning, Evelyn woke up at exactly 6:30. She brewed herself a cup of plain black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and sat at the small kitchen table by the window. From there, she could see the street slowly come to life. Joggers passed by with headphones in their ears, parents rushed children into cars, delivery trucks stopped briefly before moving on. Life moved quickly. Evelyn watched without needing to be part of it. After breakfast, she watered her plants, not because they were fragile, but because they needed consistency. She believed people were much the same. That morning routine had remained unchanged for years. What changed was how the neighborhood began to look at her. It started quietly, a pause when she walked past, a glance that lingered too long, voices that lowered when she approached. At first, Evelyn thought nothing of it. People changed, neighborhoods evolved. Then came the complaints. The first one arrived in her mailbox on a bright Tuesday afternoon, a neatly printed notice from the Homeowners Association. Lawn maintenance concern, it read. Evelyn walked outside and looked at her yard. The grass was trimmed, the edges were clean, nothing appeared out of place. She folded the paper and placed it inside a drawer. The second notice arrived 2 weeks later. Trash bin placement violation. Evelyn read it carefully, then walked to the curb. Her trash bin stood exactly where it always had. She sighed softly, not in frustration, in recognition. Someone was watching her. Across the street lived Diana Cole. Diana was 52 years old, confident, vocal, and deeply convinced of her own importance. She had lived in the neighborhood for only 3 years, yet spoke as if she had built it herself. Diana organized block parties, led HOA discussions, spoke loudly at meetings. People listened to her because it was easier than challenging her. Diana noticed Evelyn because Evelyn did not respond. To Diana, silence was disrespect. One afternoon, as Evelyn slowly pulled weeds from her flower bed, Diana approached with a tight smile. "You know," Diana said, arms crossed, "the HOA has rules for a reason." Evelyn looked up calmly. "Yes," she replied, "they do." Diana frowned, thrown off by the lack of defensiveness. "Well," she continued, "some of us work hard to keep this place looking nice." Evelyn nodded. "I can see that," she said. There was nothing more to say. Diana walked away annoyed, not because she had been insulted, but because she hadn't achieved one. At the next HOA meeting, Evelyn sat in the back row, as she always did. Diana stood at the front with clipboard in hand. "We need to address ongoing issues. Some residents are not keeping up with standards." Her eyes drifted intentionally toward Evelyn. "This affects all of us," Diana continued. "Property values matter." A few people nodded. Others avoided looking at Evelyn entirely. Evelyn kept her gaze forward. She had spent most of her life in rooms like this, rooms where confidence tried to pass as authority. What no one in that room knew was that Evelyn Harper once spent over 30 years working in regulatory compliance for a national real estate firm. Contracts, zoning laws, HOA bylaws, she had written policies people never bothered to read, and she had enforced them when arrogance made mistakes. Evelyn had not forgotten those skills. She had simply retired them. Until now. That evening, Evelyn unlocked a cabinet in her study that had not been opened in years. Inside were neatly labeled folders, notebooks, and a worn leather binder. She ran her fingers across the spines, a faint smile forming. Some habits never disappear. They wait. The following weeks unfolded exactly as Evelyn expected. More notices, more comments, more subtle humiliation. At a community gathering, Diana laughed loudly and said, "Some people just can't keep up anymore." The laughter that followed was uncomfortable, not cruel, but it was enough. Evelyn stood there calmly, her face calm, her posture steady. She did not feel embarrassed, she felt focused. From that day forward, Evelyn began taking longer walks around the neighborhood, not aimlessly, observationally. She noted fence heights, parking patterns, noise after curfew. She carried no phone in her hand, no obvious notebook. She relied on memory, and her memory was sharp, especially when it came to Diana's house. The large backyard extension, the new fence that crossed property lines, the frequent gatherings that violated noise regulations. It was all there, open, visible, ignored. Evelyn waited. Patience, she knew, was the most misunderstood weapon. One morning, she sat at her desk and turned on her computer. The HOA website loaded slowly, as it always did. She navigated it easily, downloading bylaws and compliance procedures. She read carefully, not because she needed to learn, but because she needed to confirm. By the time she shut the laptop, Evelyn had already mapped out the next several months. No confrontation, no emotion, no haste. Just process. The first official compliance review was submitted anonymously, not out of fear, out of strategy. When Diana received her first notice regarding an unapproved structure, she laughed. "This is ridiculous," she told her friends. "Probably a mistake." The second notice arrived a week later. The third included an inspection date. That was when Diana stopped laughing, and that was when Evelyn poured herself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched, because this was only the beginning.
Diana Cole's confidence did not disappear overnight. At first, she treated the notices like minor inconveniences, paperwork, delays, things she believed she could talk her way out of, the same way she always had. She had spent years building a reputation in the neighborhood. People listened to her. They followed her suggestions. She was used to being the loudest voice in the room, and loud voices, Diana believed, always won. The inspection notice changed that belief. The letter was formal, precise, written in language that left little room for interpretation. It listed the date, the time, and the scope of review. It referenced specific clauses from HOA bylaws and municipal zoning regulations. Diana read it twice, then a third time. Her smile faded. She called the HOA office immediately. "This must be a mistake," she said sharply. "I've lived here for years. No one ever mentioned this before." The woman on the phone remained calm. "Ma'am, the inspection is scheduled. If there are no violations, there's nothing to worry about." That sentence unsettled Diana more than any threat could have. If there are no violations. She hung up and stood in her kitchen, staring out the window at her backyard. The extension looked solid, well-built, expensive. She had paid good money for it, but she had never checked the permits. Across the street, Evelyn Harper sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee slowly. She had not changed her routine. She had not checked her phone obsessively. She had not told anyone what she had done. She believed that anticipation ruined outcomes. Better to let things unfold. The day of the inspection arrived with uncomfortable clarity.
A city vehicle pulled up in front of Diana's house shortly after 9 in the morning. A man in a neutral-colored jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand. He did not rush. He did not greet Diana warmly. He introduced himself professionally and began walking the property. Diana followed closely, talking nonstop. "I've hosted community events here. Everyone knows this house. There's never been a problem." The inspector nodded without comment. He measured fence height, photographed the extension, checked boundary lines. Each click of the camera felt like a small verdict. By the time he left, Diana's throat felt dry. He did not say whether she was in trouble. He did not need to. 2 weeks later, the report arrived. Multiple violations, non-compliant structures, failure to obtain permits, corrective actions required within a fixed timeframe, fines applied immediately. Diana sat alone at her dining table, the papers spread out in front of her. The language was unemotional, almost indifferent. This wasn't personal. That made it worse. She stormed out of her house and crossed the street toward Evelyn's. "You did this," Diana said as soon as Evelyn opened the door. Evelyn looked at her calmly. "I followed the rules," she replied. Diana scoffed. "Don't play innocent. You've been watching me." Evelyn nodded gently. "Yes," she said, "I have." The honesty unsettled Diana more than denial would have. "You think you're smarter than everyone else," Diana snapped. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "No," she said, "I think rules apply to everyone." Diana left in anger, slamming her car door hard enough to draw attention from nearby houses. Neighbors watched silently. They were beginning to notice patterns. As Diana's stress increased, her behavior became erratic. She argued with contractors, complained loudly at HOA offices, blamed others for her situation. People who once avoided conflict with her now avoided her entirely. Meanwhile, Evelyn's days remained unchanged. She woke early, watered her plants, sat by her window. But now, something subtle had shifted. Neighbors nodded at her more often. Some even stopped to speak. "I'm sorry for how things were handled before," one woman said quietly. Evelyn smiled politely. She did not correct the past. She focused on the present. Another notice arrived for Diana. Failure to complete corrective actions would result in legal escalation. That night, Diana could not sleep. She paced her living room, phone in hand, scrolling through contacts. Most calls went unanswered. She realized something she had never considered before. Her influence had always depended on comfort, and comfort disappears quickly when consequences arrive. A special HOA meeting was announced shortly after. Mandatory attendance. Diana read the agenda and felt her chest tighten. Compliance violations, community conduct, harassment complaints. Harassment. She knew exactly who that referred to. The meeting room filled quickly. There was none of the usual chatter. People sat quietly, some avoiding eye contact, others watching closely. Evelyn arrived last, taking her usual seat in the back. Diana stood near the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. The HOA representative began calmly, presenting facts without commentary. Photos appeared on a screen, documents were referenced. Everything Diana had ignored was now impossible to deny. Then came the section on conduct. Several residents, the HOA representative said, have reported patterns of targeted behavior. Diana shifted uncomfortably. Names were mentioned, Evelyn's among them. Evelyn stood when asked to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. "I lived here quietly. I followed the rules. I stayed respectful." She paused. But respect is not optional, and silence is not permission. The room was still. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Diana looked around, waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. For the first time, Diana felt truly exposed, not humiliated, accountable. The meeting ended without argument. Consequences were outlined, compliance deadlines, behavioral warnings, official records. Diana left quickly, her shoulders hunched, her confidence gone.
Evelyn walked home slowly. She did not feel victorious. She felt complete. Later that week, Diana stood at Evelyn's door. She did not knock loudly this time. She waited. "I'm sorry," Diana said when Evelyn opened the door. Evelyn studied her face carefully. She saw exhaustion, fear, regret. "I hope you mean that," Diana replied. Diana nodded. "I do." Evelyn closed the door gently, not out of cruelty, out of closure. The neighborhood did not become perfect overnight, but it became quieter, kinder, more aware. Evelyn returned to her routines, the same ones she had always kept. Only now, when she sat by her window, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen. Not as a problem, not as a weakness, but as a presence. And that presence, she knew, would never be ignored again. The apology did not erase the damage. Evelyn Harper understood that better than anyone. An apology could close a door, but it could not rebuild the walls that had been cracked for years. Still, she accepted what it represented. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, she believed, was where real change began. Diana Cole did not return to her old routines. The neighborhood noticed that too. She stopped hosting gatherings, her voice no longer carried across lawns. Her social media posts, once filled with sharp opinions and thinly veiled complaints, went silent. The fines continued. Contractors arrived to undo what had been built without permission. The extension was partially dismantled, the fence lowered. The backyard that once symbolized control now looked exposed. Every hammer strike echoed like a reminder. Diana spent long afternoons sitting alone, staring at paperwork she barely understood. Lawyers spoke in careful tomes, accountants discussed numbers without sympathy. For the first time in her life, she felt small. Across the street, Evelyn planted new flowers. She chose perennials, plants that returned year after year without demanding attention. She liked things that endured quietly. As she worked, a young couple approached hesitantly. "We just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, "for standing up." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I didn't stand up, I stayed steady." The woman nodded, understanding more than she said. Change in the neighborhood came slowly, but it came. HOA meetings became calmer, complaints were documented, not dramatized. People began addressing issues directly instead of whispering behind closed doors. Evelyn attended fewer meetings now. Her presence was no longer required to balance the room. That, too, felt like progress. One evening, a letter arrived addressed to Evelyn in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "I'm moving next month. I wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. D." Evelyn read it once. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She did not respond, not because she was bitter, but because closure did not always require conversation. The moving truck arrived 3 weeks later. Diana supervised quietly, her posture stiff, her expression guarded. She did not look across the street. Evelyn watched from behind her curtains, not out of satisfaction, but out of reflection. She thought about how power often disguised itself as confidence, how cruelty often hid behind volume, and how strength rarely announced itself at all. When the truck drove away, the street felt lighter. The house across the way sat empty for months before new owners arrived, a family with 2 children and a dog that barked too much. Life returned to ordinary chaos. Evelyn welcomed it. She volunteered at the local library twice a week, helping children learn to read. Parents thanked her. Children hugged her without hesitation. No one asked about the past. No one needed to. One afternoon, as she shelved books, a teenage girl lingered nearby. "Can I ask you something?" the girl said. Evelyn nodded. "How do you deal with people who treat you like you don't matter?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "You decide whether they're right," she said finally, "and you live according to your answer." The girl smiled. Years passed. The neighborhood aged, shifted, renewed itself. Evelyn grew older, slower perhaps, but no less present. Her routines remained, her mornings remained quiet, her evenings remained thoughtful. She had not changed who she was, she had simply refused to disappear. And in doing so, she had altered more lives than she would ever know. The world did not become kinder everywhere, but it became kinder where she stood, and that, she believed, was enough.
Time softened the sharp edges of memory, but it never erased the lessons Evelyn Harper had learned. She often thought about how close she had come to shrinking herself. In her earlier years, she had believed that peace meant silence, that dignity meant endurance, that being polite meant allowing herself to be overlooked. Age had taught her otherwise. Peace, she discovered, was not the absence of conflict, it was the presence of self-respect. One autumn morning, Evelyn sat on her porch wrapped in a light sweater, watching leaves fall across the street. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A dog barked. A car door closed. Ordinary sounds. She smiled. Ordinary had once felt impossible. The new family across the street waved at her regularly now. Sometimes the children helped carry her groceries. Sometimes they simply sat with her, asking questions about how the neighborhood used to look. Evelyn never exaggerated. She never painted herself as a hero. She told the truth. That streetlight used to flicker, she said once, and people used to avoid each other more. What changed? A boy asked. Evelyn shrugged gently. People learned to listen. At the library, she became a quiet fixture. Parents trusted her, children sought her out, staff relied on her calm presence during busy afternoons. One day, the head librarian pulled her aside. "We'd like to name the reading corner after you," she said, "if that's all right." Evelyn was surprised. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. The librarian smiled. "You showed up. Every week. That matters." The small plaque was installed near the children's section. The Harper Corner, a place to feel welcome. Evelyn ran her fingers over the letters the first time she saw it. Welcome. The word felt full. Years later, she received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was familiar. "I don't know if you'll want to hear from me," it read, "but I wanted you to know that moving away saved me from myself. I'm learning, slowly. I hope you're well." Evelyn folded the letter and placed it beside the first one. Some stories did not require replies. Some endings were complete simply by being acknowledged. Her health declined gradually, as health often does. There were more doctor visits, more careful steps, more quiet afternoons. But there was no fear. When neighbors noticed her absence from the porch, they checked in. When she needed help, it arrived without her asking. She had built something stronger than authority. She had built trust. One winter evening, a community meeting was held to discuss local improvements. Evelyn was invited but did not attend. Instead, she watched from her window as people entered the hall. They no longer needed her to lead. They had learned how to lead themselves. On her last birthday, the neighborhood surprised her. There were balloons, a cake, cards written in careful handwriting. Children sang, adults thanked her for things she barely remembered doing. "You taught us how to speak up without becoming cruel," one man said. Evelyn laughed softly. "I'm still learning that myself." That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the woman she had once been, the one who swallowed words and stepped aside. She felt no anger toward her former self, only compassion, because survival had required silence once. Growth had required courage later, and wisdom, she realized, was knowing when each was necessary. When Evelyn passed, the street gathered quietly. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand declarations, just stories. About a woman who listened, about a woman who stayed calm, about a woman who refused to disappear. The Harper Corner remained. The garden across the street bloomed every spring, and the neighborhood remembered, not the conflict, not the fines, not the arguments, but the lesson, that dignity does not need permission, that age does not erase worth, and that the quietest voice, when steady enough, can change everything.